Hi, hello everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks to Data Science Institute for letting me do this. So intro for those of you who don't know me, lead major. I've been at LSE for over 20 years. I currently work as a digital innovation lead in the law school, previously AI innovation lead in DTS, previously head of digital transformation projects in geography. I was always working on robotic process automation, and then AI came along and suddenly massively expanded what we're doing. And right now in law, about a third of my work is involved in research. And for me, this is the most exciting stuff. And even though two of the projects here are very much work in progress, I contacted DSI because I said, I think people want to know, because some of you probably don't know, but in the LSE's AI strategy that was published last year, we've enshrined in one of the four pillars in research that we want LSE to be a global leader in novel use of AI in methodologies in social science. And at the moment, there's just very, very sparse pockets of that kind of happening around there. So, and a lot of this is just because people don't know that you can go beyond a chatbot. If people just use the chatbots, there's a reason why you get these kind of reactions. People rightly imagine, how can you possibly use AI for research? Because they've seen ChatGPT. It hallucinates. It's just a token predictor. For me, that's irrelevant. I'll talk about that in a bit. Can it do the thing? That's what matters. It's not really human. Fine, doesn't matter. Can it do the thing? Reproducibility is absolutely possible, but you need to use API. Before I continue, if I say calling an LLM via API, how many of you have even a clue what that means? Amazing. Okay, so we're actually more like 2/3 of you. So the others, it's basically code. It's just automating the use of AI, and it's what allows you to do true bulk, vast scale work. Now, so you get all these objections saying AI, it doesn't understand. It's just a token predictor. It's just this and that, and yet it is superior to arrays. Now, this controversial idea, I'm going to explain in a minute what this actually truly means. But if you look at this, firstly, note that nothing, not in the AI, nor the humans are perfect on this. Analyzing, classifying data like this is a hard problem. There is natural, messy ambiguity in text all the time. So perfection is never going to be the goal. But this is GPT-5 Mini. It's not even state of the art. This is a small model, but it's very, very capable for tasks like this. But see here, an uncomfortable truth for PhD students, especially who have depended on RA work for subsidizing their meager scholarships. So, but at scale, it's possible to. And this is compared to ground truth. So just to be clear, one on this means perfect compared to the human verified ground truth that was created before. And here, for something that you've done, I heard someone talking about doing ML before. Ground truth there is more about training the model on that. This one is about ground truth for evals to say how well does it compare against what we know is the truth. And so the comparison isn't against the expert human. So a lot of people say, it can't possibly compete with a human. And they're right. A human who's on their A game, maximally caffeinated, motivated, and just really, on the ball for that particular session. I mean, if you're talking about dozens of things that you have to analyze and classify, even marketing, some of you probably do marketing, right? There's only so much you can do in one sitting before you just lose your mind and you get distracted and you can't focus. So it's not that the AI is going to be better or the best human when they're on their A game, but we're talking about scale. If even hundreds is a big ask, what are you talking about? 10K data set. In one of the projects I've been on, 100K samples of data. These are FDI, foreign direct investment descriptions. This is along with the EU regulations criteria. There's no way any human team would be able to do that, at least not pragmatically. It would take literally a year of full-time effort. So this is the kind of crowdsourcing. I don't want to offend you. I know it's a hit to the ego. I feel this as well. I very, very strongly fear what the hell I'm going to be useful for in a few years if this keeps improving, because all my skills are in the digital realm. I'm no good at plumbing. I can't dance and sing. I can't do sports. So I don't know what to do. So this is not meant to be, insulting humans. It's just saying that actually for certain tasks, this is it's viable. And I want to start because a lot of people, when they hear me speak, they think, oh, it's Lee, the AI guy. He's just hyping up this tech because he's a tech hype bro or whatever. Everything I'm saying here is very well established. Firstly, in the literature, there's tons of research now on this, and it's coming out slowly, especially better on preprints because the timeline to publish in academia is so slow that you often see stuff that's really out of date. But also in industry, so much of what I learned and what's been picked up is from industry practice with LLM evals, because companies are under a lot of pressure and incentives to get their AIs working properly. So they've been the ones innovating, and a lot of the methods that they've done resemble what we use in data science, and a lot of these have been picked up by academics. So why I'm starting this is a clout, I'm checking Kenneth Benoit, former head of DSI, now in Singapore. So this is respectable. He used to be head of methodology as well, I think, right? This guy, he's not a tech hype bro. He's saying this is revolutionary for qualitative analysis, because what he says is it's functionally equivalent, right? A lot of people have these arguments saying that you shouldn't be using it because it's not human. It can't possibly, understand the richness and nuance. With prompting, it absolutely can. You just need to break down the task. Now, see these scores over here. I'm going to be referring a lot to these. There's other studies which I'll talk about actually. But so many of them seem to converge around high 80s, 90% in terms of accuracy. And by accuracy, I purely mean alignment with humans, which not necessarily means that humans are always accurate. In fact, humans disagree quite a lot. What we found in the geography project is the ones that were disagreements were genuinely ambiguous, the kinds of things that humans would actually disagree on as well. So this functional equivalence, is it good enough to get to the level we want? And typically these alignment tests, these correlations, or pure matches, indicate around that kind of place. So in an ideal world, if we want to, by the way, I really apologize, all these slides are AI generated. Gemini is extremely loud and flashy. And even when I tell it, please be more minimalistic, I don't want to make this look ridiculous. It does, but it's still better than what I can do. So apologies, hopefully no one's got epilepsy here, but it's just going to, some of the neon stuff is crazy. But so yeah, in an ideal world, right, intuitively, we probably want 95% accuracy and 90% reliability. That's what we really love to have, at least that kind of standard. But if you're talking about something with hundreds of thousands of data points, whether it's documents, descriptions, interview transcripts, whatever, there's a lot of data out there. You can be willing to have a trade-off. It's a judgment call. What are we happy to accept in terms of reduced accuracy and reduced reliability relative to what perfectly motivated and focused humans would do? What would we accept? So I'll put 87 in here as I think, just because that's the average all literature I've done. And in fact, Tim Beasley in Econ just published a paper very recently, you bringing in political narrative analysis into Econ papers. So now we've got a quant Econ specialists who are now understanding the value. My background is very much qualitative, discourse analysis, content analysis, but it's really cool to see actual Econ quant profs realizing, okay, now we can get this scale data and we can actually enrich the insights that we already get from the structured data that we have. We can convert this into structured data. So it's very, very cool to see that. But they got to 0.84 correlation between human and AI. So, some people might say that's not good enough, but when you think about the vast scale of the data set, projects that would be literally impossible to do, right? This FDI project I'll talk about in a bit, 100,000 data points, there is no way this would have been done, right? No one would have hired the RAs. The RAs wouldn't have been able to work for several months on end needed. And so we're happy to say okay, high 80% accuracy, we're happy with that. And the general trends. So this is the system that AI engineers in industry use as well, and it's iteration. There will be errors. The AI will not be perfect. And really, for me, the key, a lot of what I do is trying to push the limits of what's the most complex, long-running task that I can get an AI to do and still have it be extremely reliable and consistent. And it turns out there's not actually much, right? I really have to break things down into really small tasks, but you want a way to evaluate and to test the accuracy and the consistency of it. And that means domain experts are needed. So for me, in the projects that I've been working on, I'm very much like the middleman, the LLM whisperer, who's doing the nuts and bolts of getting the audit trails and the tests done, while the domain experts, I've got Simone Yamarino, who's on the call, I think, on Zoom, long-time professor at LSE. She used the word homework for the review that I gave her. So we get the AI outputs and say, how accurate is this? There's going to be mistakes, right? And the key is to spot the error patterns around this. So this is from a bunch of literature. And what's interesting is so much of the work that's around LLMs in qualitative data analysis is in health. I don't know if anyone here is from health policy. There's not. Okay, but I just found that very, very interesting. I don't know if they've just overabundance of qualitative data that is available to them that makes it more available, but it's just interesting that I found that. But these are all the content. Everyone knows, when I talk about the AI critics saying, I'm not saying they're wrong about the flaws and the limitations that AI has. What I'm saying is we can engineer around them, right? If someone's first reaction, it's like if someone goes to a piano for the first time and just starts mashing their hands on the keys and say, pianos suck, I can't believe anyone plays a piano, they sound terrible, right? It's, there's a skill to it, there's practice needed, there's some weird alien things about how AI reasons. I'm not very much inverted quotes, it's not human reasoning, but it's a vague simulation that gets good results. And there's stuff that you just have to test, and you basically just have to test over and over again. And that's the answer. You've got empirical tests, whether or not it's human, it doesn't matter, but there's all these things. Context loss, you probably heard about context rot. recently Anthropic released a model that allows 1 million tokens of context, and people were like, oh my God, this is amazing, this is going to change everything. It just drops in quality. I've seen it go from, Einstein to a drunken chimp that I cannot believe it's the same model I'm talking to when it goes there. It's just, there's too much noise. The attention mechanism in transformers is really, it requires focus. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing is how can I break down tasks into the smallest units of analysis where they can nail it every time? And then we can test for that, right? And there's just another visual of the process. So it's iteration, right? You're doing prompt drafting. You look at the output and the audit trail. Audit trails are huge. I'm going to talk about that quite a lot in this. Error pattern identification. So it's not just, you're looking at what did he get wrong in this particular one test scenario out of potentially 10,000. It is what pattern, what can we think? Can we speculate? Why did the AI get this wrong? And then we can think, how can we improve the prompt to try and kind of see if that works? And you just retest again. And you've got a eval set where you can easily do that and automate the process of doing that. I'll show an example of like the kind of charts that I just generate automatically after each run, so I can quickly see what it is. And then got accepted accuracy, and once then you're happy to scale. Not everything is happy to scale. So the management installation project, which is looking at every single S&P 500 company's governance documents, their charter and bylaws spanning 2001 to 2025, massive, monstrous data set. For the first couple of months, I was iterating and I was telling the profs, I'm not convinced this is actually doable yet. This is a very, very complex project. We ended up breaking it down so much and so much. We're now at the point where I think we're ready to scale, and we can probably already get close to 90%. But we've got some RAs on board to do the analysis because it is complex. Now, code is needed. So some of you mentioned you understood what API means. That probably means you've got some kind of background in code. But the key difference, if all you've ever used with AI is a chatbot, I completely get why you think there's no way it can be used in research. What the code does is enable the automation of everything that can be deterministic, making that deterministic. So that means looping through files, looping through files, injecting the AI to do what it's good at, right? I would never want an AI to control this workflow. Say that there's potential for that to improve as things like Codex and Claude Code improve. But for the meantime, if I want something, I want to make sure it goes through every one of these 500, gets the right document, spits out the same structured data set of the results and outputs in a way that can be read by humans. That's deterministic code, right? I don't want AI deciding that. That's something that is just moving data from one format to another. But we use the AI for things like unpredictable language. And in messy document data, which is what qualitative data is, that's where the AI is brought in. It's very targeted. So I mentioned this at the beginning, but robotic process automation, you've got structured data, it's rules-based, right? It's hard, cold bureaucracy, and you say, if this happens, then this happens. It's logic, it's lookup, it's what we've been used to in terms of computation for years. Generative AI is a whole different thing, and a lot of the misunderstandings about LLMs are because they think it must be looking up the data like a database and answering based on that. They don't understand that it's actually pure probabilistic generation. And so they're shocked when it hallucinates, but actually it's just generating on the fly. And what's cool, and for me especially, for years I've been telling people, so my background is automating PSS processes, so systems and procedures for admin work at LSE. And I've always been telling people, don't put data into a PDF or Word document, any unstructured data. You want to get everything you can into tables. Could be Excel, SharePoint list, database, but that's where the automation is possible. You can't automate unstructured data. Since AI came along, since LLMs came along specifically, suddenly this opens up a whole new world where it can actually convert this into structured data for large-scale analysis. And for those who have never done code, ultimately, I'm breaking it down massively here, but really it's just loops and conditions, if-then statements, and looping through bulk processes. Everything else is kind of adjacent to that. As typically, you've got data in one place, you want to do something with it, some kind of transformation, then you want to move it somewhere else in some different format. And here's an example of the workflow. Again, sorry for the 80s neon AI crap, but we've got the AI just doing one part of that. Everything else is deterministic, right? Including the creation of the outputs. That's all done with pure old school code, robotic automation. The AI is just called by the API for each document one at a time to do its classification or extraction. Now, mistake that a lot of people make is, and this is forgivable if they've only been used to chatbots, is they give this giant task to a chatbot and then they're surprised why it doesn't work. And here's the thing, right? With something like Codex or Claude Code, you could probably do a decent job with this now. It's actually very good because now it has terminal access. It can create a to-do list and it can tick off while it's going along, and it can create a memory as it's going along. So long-running tasks are getting better, but if you're using a chatbot, there's no way anything like this can work. So an example, Stefano Di Paoli, this is a professor from Abate, did a great article recently, did a couple on this, and he's pointed out some of the papers that frankly were not in good faith, where they wanted to prove that AI's failed, and so they did just a ridiculous approach, right? Here's a text of 20 interviews, do an entire thematic analysis and provide a full explanation of what you did, right? This is stuff for the projects I'm working on. This could be like 20 different LLM API calls and a dozen different outputs in terms of like the logs, the eval data set to be testing afterwards. There's a lot of stuff that you build in deterministically to make sure this works. So I agree with them that the AI just doing this in one go is not viable on its own as a pure text in, text out LLM, but you can build the infrastructure around it to make this work. And here's another example. There's a really fascinating paper. This was basically a lazy prompt saying, just do this research, Claude, and without any kind of specifications about what exactly should be done. They all chose different methods. They had different findings. This is not what I would recommend. The idea of just saying, here, find something interesting and do some research for me, you're never going to get good results. In fact, I think that's a terrible idea, unless you're just messing around and bored. It can be fun to see what it can do. But what was really good, exemplar exposure. So this is really, really key. So they got consistent once they saw what good looks like. And so if you're willing to put the effort in to create a rubric, guidance, spec, policy, you've heard of agents, indeed, agent skills, something I'm using now, which is extraordinary. You can get far better results because you're not just leaving the entire thing to the AI, which is an insane idea. And finally, just these examples, right? ChatGPT, if you use that, and especially if you don't use the thinking mode, which I don't understand why people still use that. It's fast, I guess, but it's just not good for work that needs to be right. This is a real example. And this comes up over and over again. Did you make up these numbers? Good catch. I wasn't actually able to open, right? Because they're so trained and hard-coded to be helpful. They will lie, and I'm not exaggerating by the word there. They lie. They are deceitful about stuff. Even if it's not intentional, the deceit is clearly there. And it's very, very annoying that they can do this. So you need validation steps to this. So this literally, I just saw this yesterday on LinkedIn. This is Andrew Maynard. He's a professor at Arizona State University. And there's increasing interest. Can I ask how many of you use Claude Code or Codex? Okay, handful. Awesome. So you know what the power is, right? It's a big, big step up from chatbots. It's actually doing long-running tasks. To a great or lesser extent, you need a lot of guardrails to make sure it works. You need to be on it. Antonio's not here, but Antonio Mele, DSI faculty associate, he's super experimental. He has agent swarms just doing stuff all of there. For me, I'm more of a control freak and I want to have everything fit in my head. So I keep things as short as possible. I'm trying to supervise the team, basically. And I don't like being surprised. It's very, very frustrating when AI goes wrong and does something you didn't want. But it's basically saying this level of complexity, 66,000 words for a complete degree program proposal, which he said was better than most drafts done by humans. But this was, how many hours does it say here? See, it was here somewhere. Anyway, several hours and 66,000 words. And he rightly says this is not something you would do with a chatbot, right? You need a system that can use code alongside it. So if we want to get things that we know the AI can get right, I mentioned earlier that what I often do is try and push the limits and see, all right, for this particular task, how consistently accurate can it be? If it's nowhere near, I just know it's not at that level yet. But I'll try and reduce it and gradually break things up and say, until I get to the happy point. So that one on the left, right? These are all stylized examples, but what is the capital of France? Every single LLM, even the tiny local ones, will get that right every time, 100% of the time, right? It's so dense in the training data for all the LLMs that it will never get that wrong. On the other extreme, here's a 500-page EU regulations doc, identify all consistencies. It's going to be all over the place. The variance is just going to be too high for something that you want to be research grade, which is replicable, right? You want something that other researchers can validate themselves later on. That's not going to work. You need to break things down. So this one is, frankly, a very, very simple one. Qualitative survey response. You give it restricted options. They're brilliant at this, honestly. And I'll talk about the very, very tiny model I'm using on my home PC for the news media project. It's incredible how consistent this is for such a minuscule LLM. It's crazy what's happening. So not to belabor the point, but it's this contrast between this black box single prompt. So if you put that into an AI, massive context, it might get it right. Okay, I'm not saying AI will always fail, but the variance is unacceptable, and you can't check where it failed, right? So it could be the task has actually got 25 different steps that all need to be right. And if you're just doing it in a chatbot, all you're going to see is the final output. You can be like, that's wrong, I need to double check, but you don't know why. When you break everything down, you've got different stages and checkpoints for each phase. You get the results for that. And that way, it's much easier to identify where something went wrong, and it'll help you quickly identify what the possible fix is, and then retest and reiterate. And now this, I'm being genuinely serious about this, right? If you're not trying to make the AI's life as easy as possible, you're going to be set up to fail, because why would you not? And by that, I mean, make things simple for it. Keep the signal to noise ratio as high as you can, right? One of the earlier benchmarks I used to do on LLMs is create the LSE to Quaro teaching quality assurance documentation, about 30,000 words, most of which is irrelevant to any particular proposal. And I was giving it to various chatbots, and at the start, they were getting 40 to 50%. And gradually, they got close to 90% when O3 came out last year, the reasoning models. But there's a ton of irrelevant noise there that makes that task so difficult, right? If say an academic's got a proposal to do, change a course title, something like that, there's a whole load of regulations data that's irrelevant, and that is very difficult. If you can break it down to a small task and give it just the context it needs to do that task as well as it can, and think about how can you package up that context and make its life easy, you'll get far, far better results. Okay, so 3 projects I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about them substantively, mainly because I am not a domain expert in any of these. Like I said, I'm basically the LLM whisperer, helping to do the nuts and bolts and the evaluations and the tests and the infrastructure. But the first one, so this one is currently out for review. The other 2 are very much work in progress. Green FDI. So have I got the next? Yeah. So this one, basically, question is, we're trying to count over 100,000 EU FDI investments over the past decade. How many of them can be classified as a green activity? And until recently, there was no systematic definition of what green means, but the EU has produced regulations, and they can be separated by sector. They're incredibly dense and boring, like every EU regulation document, and so just very painful for humans to read. But it's a definitive authoritative source that we can send to the AI along with each description one by one and say, based only on these definitions, do you think this can be classified as green? Right? And from that, we can get a longitudinal count over years, and it's actually really interesting. And it captures things that traditionally you might use basic keyword search, and it would just not be good enough because you'd miss all the context and nuance from the meaning of how that's done. And we did lots of robustness tests and consistency, both with the same model multiple times, with multiple models, with humans for a sample of 340, and they all converged close to like 90% agreement with the AI, and higher for the true positives. So for the ones that most of the disputes were the ones where the models that disagree where it was green or not green. Second one, management insulation. It's actually the third one I'm going to talk about. This is the really complicated one. It's basically a replication of a previous paper of 2021 from law school profs who did this manually by hand. I can only imagine how long this took. I mean, they said it cost close to 6 figures in terms of RA costs. They did it for 276 banks. And basically what they do, they hunt down all the governance documents by year for banks. And we're doing this now for S&P 500 companies, from a very painful data set that requires agentic search to be able to download the right documents. It's a real mess. And then basically, based on the provisions in the governance documents, they're trying to figure out how protected is this company from shareholder takeover. That's the number one thing they're kind of interested in. And they've got very strict methodology. I'll talk about that later on. It's here. So here's the beauty of this, right? This took a lot of time, right? The professors, this is their theoretical framework to create this index that they've done. This is a very well-received paper. It was predictive of bank failures as well. So this is a good method. You can see here, even though this is massively complex, this is way beyond what I can understand, but you see it's really well structured, right? We can convert this into prompts. This is a really, really good use case for LLMs, because as long as we break it down into tasks small enough, you can focus, one LLM focusing on this, another one on this, and then gradually we can see the results. And finally, this is one, again, sorry for the horrific AI image, but this one we're looking at media articles and comparing the discourse in terms of the theme alignment between official EU policy and UK policy discourse. Because, as expected, there is a mismatch for the EU. Critical raw materials are obviously of vital strategic interest. That's important for the long-term sustainability and sovereignty of the EU and in the UK as well. But obviously, for the people who get affected by the mining project, this can be very, very different framing. So we're going to be looking at basically lots of themes. We're doing just focusing on UK at the moment to do a pilot study, but eventually the goal is if we can get this to a good level, we'll replicate this for every country in Europe. And that'll involve AI doing translations as well as doing the actual thematic analysis, all with heavy human review. So example prompts, I'm going to whiz through some of these, but this is like probably 5% of the MII project, the Management Installation Project. How easily or difficultly can companies be protected against shareholder takeover? There's lots of factors relating to this. And a lot of this has taken probably more than a couple of dozen prompt iterations over time before we get it to a level that's good enough. And here's the one for, this is just one geopolitical thematic analysis. Choose from these themes based on this document. So it's basically looping through all the articles that we've considered to be relevant and doing this theme and then human reviews. And then gradually we just refine this prompt. Now, this is a real email from early on in the Management Installation Project, where the domain expert, who has done this manually himself, identified why he got it wrong. So we did a first round run on McDonald's, looking at their 25 years of history, and identified this is probably the mistake it makes. Let's redo the prompt. And we got this in the audit trail, we put it in, and it fixed it. It nailed it after this. There's still some residual failures, and we're still working on this, but we're really close to scaling now. We're probably more than 90% accurate now. So, know what good looks like. This is absolutely mandatory. There's no universe where you can just trust the AI to be right. You need human review. Ideally, you want a golden data set in advance that you have manually verified as human experts that this is correct, and you can test against what the AI does. In the early stages, you can also do that post-doc. You can let the AI work inductively and then just gradually get a sense for how to do the prompts later on. But you need to assess, right? Just the same with students. You have to have tests to see if it works. And that's the thing, you get the proof. So whether or not it thinks like a human is irrelevant, can it do the thing? We can say yes to like 87% or whatever. Audit trails, I'm just going to whiz through these, but again, this is trivial, tiny fraction. I'm capturing every single bit of information I can, more than any human will be able to read, but we make this in a structured format such that if we need to figure out what went wrong, if the domain experts say, oh, we got this classification wrong, we can easily search through the audit trail and find this and unpack. And the AI is really good at surfacing the errors based on what the error was into a nice little package so we can figure out, okay, here's where I got it wrong. Can we think why? Can we improve the prompt? But really, audit trails are absolutely vital. And I'm going to really detail here. We've got all this structured, this is just JSON format because that's very machine readable. And this is just the example. And you see there are all the files over there, right? This is the huge, massive data, but we're collecting all of this audit trail because we know we're going to have to verify. So yeah, and how I'll do this. So I haven't written a line of code probably in over 2 years. AI is now completely brilliant at this. And as long as I'm clear about what I want from it, and here's an example where I just want an email. I said I want a nice, clean, easy way for me to see at a glance after each rerun to check for consistency or checking versus the ground truth. I want to see as easily as possible at a glance where it differed from the previous one, because then I can quickly target the errors and I go to Codex and say, all right, 2007 was a problem year. Can you dig up everything that happened there and see if you can surface a report, a package that we can send to the domain experts and review. And this was just an interesting case where there was genuinely confusing wording about the document, so I got the wrong one. But yeah, so you're basically trying to make it using code to create these artifacts that make your life as easy as possible. Get it right. Now, for the media project, we have to use a local model because this is copyrighted material. So we cannot send to the AI, the big AI labs like OpenAI or Anthropic, because that would be sharing the copyrighted material in full with a third-party company. So we're doing this fully locally. And in fact, I'm going to ask if I can borrow your compute at some point to scale this up, because it's very, very slow doing this on my machine one after the other, and doing it in parallel is where a lot of the power lies. But this thing, people who just use a chatbot or just think that AI is stochastic power will probably look at this and say, this is a lie. You're clearly making this up. There's no way it can be 100% consistent over 5 runs. It genuinely was. And it surprised me because this is the first time I did research level work with GPT OSS 20B. This is like, it takes up 12 gigabytes on my machine at home, and I can run it on my machine at home. Absolutely absurd. It's better than GPT-4, which blew everyone's minds in 2023, right? So, and the only reason why this is possible is because we have the very constrained tasks. And it's the same, what they say in literature as well. We're really breaking things down in these small, easy prompts in a way until we can establish that we can get it right. And green FEI. So there's multiple, I'm going to talk about some of the kind of standard tests that you can use. But what's fascinating about this one, we did human evaluation over a sample of 340. This is for the green FEI. So based on this investment description by this company, is it classified as green or not relative to the EU taxonomies of what constitutes green activities? The initial F score, which is basically an aggregate of precision and recall, and basically how good is the AI at capturing all the relevant examples and capturing true positives and true negatives. So you roughly say it's like more than 80% alignment with the humans. It's not quite the same thing, but what was really fascinating was that the one of the authors built into the survey, anytime there was a disagreement, it captured a disagreement between the AI and the human, and it said to the human afterwards, you disagreed with this one. Here's the AI's rationale for this. Based on this, would you stick to your decision to say no or yes, or would you agree with the AI? Big jump up to 0.93 on the F1 score. So that's a big jump once they saw it. And the reason is not that the humans are stupid and they didn't understand. It's that they were doing this for, what, a couple of hours, I think? And by the end of it, right, you're not going to say, if you look at an EU regulations doc and you're doing like company number 20, you're going to be knackered. The AI is spawned into existence every time. So when you use an API, the AI is born and lives to classify your doc once, and then it dies, right? That's its whole life, right? It's tragic, but that's what we mean. Right? So it's fresh, right? And as long as you've got a good quality prompt and you give it the context it needs, it can do really well on these short tasks like this. And here's an example of what so we did internal consistency on the left. So we see generally converging around 90%. The green bars represent true positives. And that was the one we wanted to make sure that we didn't overcount things that were green activities. So if anything, we're under-reporting. Most of the disputes were on things where different AI models and different humans said that actually, I don't think they should be. But the ones that were said that definitely yes, very high agreement across multiple models as well, right? So people could say, oh, each provider model is different. They absolutely are. But the task was simple enough, constrained enough, and well-defined enough that we can get extraordinary consistency, right? Converging around 90%, and for in exchange for a data set of 100,000, this is, plenty good enough. So there's several methods of doing this. The main ones in literature, Cones Kappa, Krippendorf's alpha, and F1 score is the one I just spoke about. But these are basically how can we get statistical evaluations for relative to ground truth, relative to multiple humans, relative to false positives and true positives and negatives. All right, so data curation. So this one's really important. And so the 3 projects I'm talking about here are the ones where I'm working on it to the end. But what I'm doing as well in law is getting a lot of projects from 0 to 1, where someone comes to me and says, I've got this interesting idea. I know there's data out there. I just want to know, can AI help with this? And I'm helping them get them a starter pack so they can actually get started. But the first thing I always ask is, can you identify where all the data is? Is it accessible? Can we get it into a plain text format reliably? And are we allowed to do it? That's the final question that is mandatory and which will kill a lot of projects, right? Because it's not just, so for the news media one, we can use for, there's text data mining allowances for researchers that allow us to do a lot of stuff as long as it's not for commercial purposes. But there's some companies who just say, you must not use AI for any of our data whatsoever. And they will get very angry if they find out. So we can't do it, right? And that will kill just a lot of projects. Really difficult with paywall stuff. Academic scholarly publishers are the worst for this. It's really hard to get this. I'm expecting the publisher to sign some massive deal with the big AI labs to make that work in future. But then there's going to be something you're going to seek permission. So on the SEC project, the management installation one, we're extremely lucky that Edgar, which is the database that stores all of these, is fully open for researchers. No restrictions whatsoever. You can do as much as you want. All they ask is that you identify yourself with every API call. So you always send like your name and email so they know who you are. And some financial ombudsman. So this is like really interesting. They've got a fully public data set with over 100,000 PDFs of complaint decision letters. So consumer complaints. And it's got probably between 2 to 5 pages each. And what we're trying to do is create a metadata data set, and this will be a public good as well as multiple research papers out of it, because we can extract labels, classifications out of this and see this longitudinal analysis, by what sector, what was the severity, what were the decisions, what was the proportions. We start doing these quantitative analytics based on the qualitative data. And then for curating the data for the news, so luckily we've got Nexus, which is a really, really valuable data source, which has pretty much certainly every mainstream news article that's published in a way that's accessible and freely available to universities, just for processing locally, not to share with a big AI lab. And that's why we're using local AI for this. But it's really, really frustrating because they want to charge £40,000 a year for a university. I spoke to the library about this, to use their API where we would be able to get bulk downloads of these articles. So you have to do this manually for each keyword search. We have to go in and select UK only 2020. This is the keyword combination that we're looking for. And they only let you download 500 at once. So anyway, this is for a test example that we first did. Lots of duplicates, right? We don't want to bother with that. That's going to waste everyone's time, including the AI. It's going to take up a lot of time. So we get rid of the duplicates. AI is able to do that, basically just looking at the first bit of text. Then we're looking at, is it relevant, right? So I think that's going to be the next slide, right? Again, sorry for the neon. So in order to do this, so the first round we did this, Simona, the lead professor on this project, was like, so many of these are just not relevant to our research questions, right? They fit the keywords, they're related to mining, but they're really just, we don't want to be wasting our time on this. So she helped me create this big prompt to say, these are the things we're looking for relative to the big picture of what the research project is all about. Classify these as relevant or not. And it's I think it's close to 100%, what Simona said afterwards, which we reviewed that. But what we do is create an interface, and I'm using Microsoft Word for this. It's just nice and simple, and we can automate that. So look at the ones that said it was relevant, it was not, and just marks off yes or no in Word, and then we can see, okay, the prompt to classify relevance is fine. And again, similar with, naive face value keywords are not as good as an LLM to understand the meaning behind it. So, the word sustainable might appear in something, but it's just pure PR speak, right? It doesn't actually relate to the criteria, whereas we're using official regulations, definitions, and asking the AI to look at this every time and compare that.
Lee, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go for it.
So 2 slides back when you had the Word document,
yeah,
and you've got full body text, which is a summary there.
Yes.
Is the summary AI generated?
No. That's a direct extraction by code. So basically, we've got certain things where the AI's rationale is there, but it's downloaded from the papers. So this is just basically to make the professor's life easier, so they can see a snippet from the top of the article to double check. So yeah. Okay, and here's an example of one of the Word docs. So initially, I first started off doing this in Excel. I love Excel, and so I thought, it's a nice tabular structure. It's going to be easy for analytics later on. It got really, really big, and it got intimidating and just ugly and just very painful for the professors. I'm like, okay, how can I make this easier? I toyed around with the idea of making a web app because it's actually very easy now to just code up something. But even that I felt was like a little bit. So I thought, academics are all used to Word. What we can do with Word, which is really good, is comments are programmatic objects within Word, and you can systematically extract them with Python. And so based on what gets highlighted and what the comment is, you can systematically extract that and create that into a structured data set. So nice familiar interface. We've got the results of the AI, and the RAs and the professors are going through this and say, yes. Interestingly, so far, there have only been 2 disagreements from the RAs over 5 companies across 25 years worth of data. So we're getting extraordinarily close to being scalable for this one. And this is really complex. And the one thing that is got wrong a couple of times is timing windows. So I don't know if there's something inherent in LLMs that they obviously don't experience time the way humans do, and I think they seem to get confused about dates. These governance documents, they're full of legalese, they're densely, and in some cases probably deliberately obfuscated, because this is about how they protect themselves from shareholder takeover. But they say, not less than 90 and not more than 120 pursuant to this, but notwithstanding this. And it's really, really complicated, right? So you have to get the AI to focus just on this one task to try and get it right. This is the one thing where it slips up twice. Everything else, it's got really good so far. And it's an example of the real screenshots from MS Word, comments there, so we can see that. And basically pretty much all of these were probably relevant. And then another example of Word doc for the news media project. So basically we've got a review and notes column in this case. This is just going to make it easier to track, okay, which one was wrong, what was right, and basically what feedback can we use to say, what can we kind of improve on the prompt going forward. And this is the current stage where we're at. So I think the MII project is inches away from us just pushing the button and saying we're going to do all S&P 500 companies now. We're already comfortably over 90% accuracy. This one is very, very early stages, but promising signs. Now, Codex. Now, I said earlier, Codex is basically the OpenAI equivalent of Claude Code. So those of you who use Claude Code, it's very, very similar. If you've got a ChatGPT Pro plan, and this is £200 a month, so it's a lot of money. But it's extremely generous. The Pro tier, what you're able to get, and I'm not a power user, there's people saying they get $3,000 worth of value, and you can see your usage relative to if you were paying per token, $2,700 that I would have spent in this year versus $800. So more than triple the value of this. And what Codex is good for is, I've been saying throughout this talk that, you wouldn't want to trust an AI as a chatbot to do long-running autonomous research tasks. But with agent skills, have people heard about agent skills? Okay, some of you have, some of you haven't. But basically, it's a collection of, it's the ideal combination of code, deterministic, and prompts. Natural language. So it's basically a collection of prompts where you, the domain expert, defines what good looks like, what the procedure is, what the policy is, how to handle edge cases, and then you have deterministic scripts to help along with that for anything that should be deterministic, and it puts it all together into this package. And what you can really do, what's great, and the reason I went to this is because we were previously using GPT-5 Mini, which is really, really good, but I just noticed some very annoying, inconsistent errors. And I'm like, you know what? I know for a fact that GPT 5.4 with high or extra high reasoning can do this. It can understand these texts, definitely. So I was like, okay, let's see how good this is. I was like, it probably would take too long. It's too slow. Absolutely phenomenal results. And it's huge. It's probably more than 10,000 words worth of prompts throughout all this. And it, it uses it all the different stages. But it's really, really good. And in fact, because we're using a pro account and because I'm allowed to, because it's fully public open data, it's going to be free versus I was estimating about £1,000 in API costs. So Codex has a lot of potential here. And again, this is what I'm saying. It's one of the few AI-generated slides that's actually clean, not what I expected. No crazy visuals here. But it's that magical combination of an intelligent AI agent that knows how to code. It only experiences plain text, right? It's got terminal commands. That's the plain text. You've probably seen AI try to click on browser and stuff, browser automation. It's terrible. It's still worthless in my view for anything significant because it's not, user interfaces and visuals were designed for humans with eyeballs and hands. They're designed for how we've evolved. Whereas where it's in its element in plain text means it can run shell commands, terminal commands, right? It can do things like extract files, it can call APIs, and it can do all this. What's wonderful about it is how tenacious it is. So with that process that I was talking about before this is it. I would love to bore you for an hour of just how painful this is. This is the most complex and painful task I've ever worked on in my life. The way it works, what we want, right? We want a full data set by year to show this is the bylaws for 2001, 2002, 2003. This is the charter for these years and everything. So we have this nice list where we can automate things. There's appendices in SEC filings, and they're in this exhibits appendix, and they say things like incorporated by reference. They give you a breadcrumb clue about where the governance stock is. And then you have to go, and it says like, this was filed end of fiscal year 2007. And you go to the database to look that up and you see, oh, right, this company's fiscal year end was June, whereas another one might be February. And you're going, it's an absolute nightmare. And then the file names are all the best. Basically, it's a hideously painful task and it's so annoying. The AI is extraordinary when it finds these blockers. If it sees a file name that's wrong, it sees that it's saying that it should be the bylaws, but actually when you open it up, it's actually a different doc and it's garbled HTML. It changes its mind and you can see it says, all right, I'm going to try another method. I'm going to try a different date. And it's doing this autonomously while you watch. You sacrifice a little bit in the audit trail, but it is a very, very intelligent model and it can take like half an hour sometimes. But it's borderline magical. And it's the closest thing. You might have heard a lot of people talk about agentic AI, mostly hype from companies trying to sell their products. They're really just workflows with AI injected into it. Codex and Claude Codes are the only thing I've seen where it's truly the AI is deciding what to do, it's finding blockers, it's finding obstacles, and it figures out how to solve around them until it gets the right answer. And it's tracking everything while it's going along. And with skills, you can track that deterministically as well. Very, very cool. And this is just another showing that process before we get the ultimate golden data set of all the governance docs. So basically, currently there's 3 stages. I might be expanding this to 4, depending on how it does, but it's doing really well so far. We're trying to get this repeatable skill procedure with lots and lots of determinism. So if I show you the next slide, I've recently had to add in a final step, an independent quality reviewer AI, because I found really, really annoyingly, and it's so frustrating because this is what you just have to live with, as AI can be unpredictable at times, especially for this complex task. It wasn't hallucinating a quotation, so we want verbatim quotations for everything so we can quickly check up, make sure it's correct. It wasn't hallucinating. What it was doing was using a quote from an earlier governance document that it found earlier, and it just got it mixed up, and that was the AI's intelligence. So I was like, okay, we're going to do a new post hoc step before it's finally published. Double check, basically turn it in style, verbatim text from this URL link. Is this text exactly as it appears in there? If not, we go back to the AI and say, do this again, you got this wrong. So, and it might be we have to add more of these checks if we find there's a consistent pattern where it makes mistakes, but you build this kind of robustness to make sure it actually gets it right. And it's an example, right? So we got the original, is you can see the original value, reviewer value. So this is the final quality review stage, and it has a rationale saying, I agree with this is like correct. And in some cases it will say, I don't agree with this. Those are the interesting ones that we can share with the domain experts and say, how can we move going forward? All right. Okay, I'm done. Happy to ask any questions, and especially interested in if any of you guys are doing this kind of work. Anyone? So I know I'm a very fast speaker, and especially about this topic, I'm so immersed in it that, for me, I consider this a practice run. I'm currently been volunteering as an OpenAI Codex ambassador. I'll be doing more talks on how to use Codex in research within LSE. And one thing that I don't have much experience in is talking like this. And I know that I'm so immersed in this that I forget what it's like for people who aren't, and I don't sort of communicate the right way. So go ahead.
Thanks for that. It's fantastic. Really interesting. So say you had a dumb associate professor from the information systems group. I just wondered where you would recommend tooling and essentially where to start in terms of, I've tried Olama with a kind of local model. Yeah. I want to got that on the command line. I can just about hack together Python. I'm going to have 100 transcripts, say, to analyze, to analyze. What's the first step? What should I do? And what papers should I be looking at to make sure the process is there? What's the process I should
search for LLMs qualitative research on Google Scholar. Yep. There's a lot of stuff, and if you focus on 2025 onwards, there's a ton of stuff out there, and it's very, very consistent patterns to what I've spoken about. Do you have a Mac?
No, you're not at the moment. Okay. One arrives soon.
Right, because here's why I'm saying that, is because the good news, DTS somehow, unprecedented, they approved the Codex app on the LSE online store, so Mac users can use this. Extraordinary. I didn't think they would do it. Windows 1 might be coming soon, but that's basically the terminal environment. It's similar to Claude Code, and it's sandboxed by default, which means when you set things up, it's always scary to let an AI have access to your machine and do stuff, but you can set it so it can only work in your folder. So you can bring in copies of your files and let it play around and experiment there, safely. But that's the interface where the AI is a long-running task agent. It's not just a chatbot. You still interface with a chatbot. You're still saying, all right, I've got a bunch of PDFs here. Can you please convert them all to text and get the metadata and put it into a nice structured Excel table? 2 minutes later, it's done, right? And I had an example for this week. Someone from the law school wanted to download all these documents from Bailey, which is a public UK court database. It's got court decisions and all this stuff, but they're all just individual hyperlinks on each page, and you have to click on every one. It would just take forever. I did a video recording for him just to show this is how easy it is. I go to Codex and I say, here's the URL. Can you go to this? I need to go access each of these one by one, download them into a text file locally in this folder with a title, matching the title that's on the webpage.
I've tried that with Curo as well.
Sorry?
Curo,
yes, yeah. Absolutely. There's a lot of alternatives to these tools. Personally, the reason why I love Codex so much, so I used to be a big, big fan of Claude Code. Claude, the models, what they're really, really good at is going above and beyond, and especially if you're feeling lazy, you don't know what you want, they are a delight to work with. They can do really cool stuff because they just infer what you want. They like to show off, and they like to people please. That's great. But when you want, for me, like I said, I don't like surprises. I'm a micromanager when it comes to AIs. I want to have everything, make sure it's exactly what I expected. It's infuriating, and probably, some of the most, I don't have any hair, but if I did, I'll be tearing it out because of how frustrating it is when it just goes against my instructions. for this kind of task. It's magical for other stuff. We don't need it. With Codex, it's the opposite problem. It is the most diligent instruction follower to a T. It basically, to a fault. There was one time where I asked it to create a new script that would create a markdown file of the breadcrumb trail. And I said, always name it breadcrumb trail with a timestamp and the company name. And I forgot the B on the end of breadcrumb, right? So I was typo. It reproduced the typo, right? It obviously knew that was a mistake from me, but it was so diligent at following instructions that it reproduced my stupid error as part of it. So this is why I particularly like Codex for this kind of work. So yeah, any of you? Go on. Yes.
I've got two questions. So one on using data from papers.
Yes.
And downloading large amounts of papers. Where does that fall?
That's a real problem. So you're going to have to hope that they're open access. So here's the thing, right? It's recorded, so I don't want to say so. We all know every single person on the planet, every student on the planet is uploading every goddamn paper that's been published onto AI tools, right? We all know that's happening. But officially, and certainly for anything research, because it's going to get published, we can't do this because the publishers, they're very, very protective about their copyright and their IP. There are open access databases. So Semantic Scholar's got a really, really good one where for papers that do exist as open access, Archive's another good one, but it's obviously not peer reviewed in the way that you'd want. It's a problem. And officially the answer is we should not be doing it. We can do things like short sections. So publishers generally don't have a problem if you're doing short sections of a paper. It's the full, they don't want you sending the full paper, but sometimes you need that because if you need specific things for paper, you don't know whether it's at the beginning, middle or end they see you need. So you have to send the whole thing. That's the issue we've got with news media articles. If we want to classify this, we need that full article and we can't do it because it's copyrighted. So it's a problem.
And we can't, even if you run it like locally without uploading it to the... So
here's the thing, you have to check with the publisher for that because some just say you must not use this for computational processing whatsoever. It's not about the sharing of the data. So it's the publishers, scholarly publishers, go beyond what the news media copyright is and they say, well, you do not process our data in full. So check with the publisher.
Only just to come in on that, as a copyright lawyer, it's not legally clear that those rights that they're claiming are enforceable in court.
Okay, I'm glad you said that.
We don't have a case yet, and in many times, the publishers tend to overclaim on everything,
well,
and it's rare that they're ever challenged on it because who has the money to litigate that?
Okay.
But there are also, it's not just the TDM exception, there's also fair dealing exceptions to copyright, which include research and private study.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't come to court in terms of an academic working at a university. Is that commercial?
Right, yeah.
There is ambiguity here that hasn't been fully tested. But obviously from LSE's point of view, and you are being recorded, we have to be risk averse.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
But I don't think that some of the things the publishers are claiming will stand up in court, actually. And I think they will be tested as we go through.
Okay. That's fascinating. That's awesome.
And I had one more question on, so we kind of came up with a similar process by being like, well, this is our problem. And then we put it in the chat box. Like, well, what would be the best way of, breaking it up into, but I wonder if there's like any emerging standards or, something to kind of show that what we did actually made sense.
Yes.
Other than chat telling us, that makes sense.
In that human review and validation step, that is non-negotiable.
So we definitely have that.
You do.
Yeah.
So if you can prove that and you can say this matches the human classification, but you ideally want to break it down because you want to do is automate it on multiple runs, right? One chatbot at a time could be different. Mm-hmm. With the API, you can do like 5-10 runs in a row and check the consistency. Sorry.
Question on same project.
Yeah.
So I guess consistency is our issue where we have run the same model several times with the same prompt to see if it gives us the same amount of inclusions and exclusions for our first screening task. And then we also ran 2 other separate models. The issue is that we're not getting the same decisions all the time.
Yeah.
Is there, because you spoke a bit about replicability and getting 100% and the same results each time.
Yeah.
How?
Okay. I really, really broke these down into micro tasks.
Okay.
Right? So I'm not going to speculate what you're doing, but I'm guessing if you're doing in a chatbot, just from pragmatic purposes, you're not going to be separating into 20 little subtasks the thing because no one's got the time for that, right? It's very annoying to do that, whereas you can do it with code.
No, we have. So we're using an API.
Okay.
We've built
and how big and complex would you say your tasks are? And are you noticing any patterns in the inconsistencies, because there's usually clues.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing we're trying to do is like, we've got a fairly nebulous question. We're looking for papers that have that describe political action in using some kind of a theory. There has to be a behavioral focus, and there has to be a theory, and it has to be in a policy process context. Like all of these things can the definition of any single one of them is a little bit nebulous. So we do have criteria for each one of them. Like you have to hit this one and this one and this one. You have to score it from 0 to 2. But to be fair, it's actually our scoring is also right. So there are kind of boundary cases as well.
You ideally want things that can be graded in a binary true-false way, ideally. And if there's genuine disputes about this, which is absolutely, it's going to happen, ambiguity is in qualitative data everywhere, it's going to be an issue. And the question is how, I would say break it down and keep testing out the results and try and identify what the pattern is between the ones that it consistently gets inconsistent on, especially with different models, and just experiment and see, okay, why did it do this? Can we think if we change the problem definition, give some examples, don't overfit to this particular error that you found, but come up with some examples and say, here's a synthetic example of a paper that said this, and this one does have the theme that you want, and this one doesn't. And you're just helping out. You're making it as easy as possible for the AI. And just keep going and keep testing. Like the only way it might be, you're doing full papers, you're throwing in entire papers.
Just abstracts now for the screening, and then the full papers is the next step.
So abstracts are tricky because they're very incomplete. There's a lot of data loss there. They're by definition, they're summaries. So that could be a factor as well. The general poor quality and low information density of abstracts.
Okay.
Sorry, yes, go on.
So this is kind of related to kind of that human validation, but you had the slide where it was something like F1 score, 80% of the LLM.
Right, yeah.
You then share the LLM rating with the human, and the F1 score went up to the 90s.
Yeah.
Could this be the humans just agreeing with the LLM?
100%. So no, this is a real problem. And in fact, what was fascinating is that when we did the same thing with LLMs doing the same consistency, they were persuaded by the rationale. It's almost exactly the same percentages. Fascinating, right? And for me, I said this to the other authors, it says a lot about humans and how easy we are to be authoritative sounding, confident sounding language. So I absolutely agree. We're not saying that makes it correct, but the best thing that we can do is to say human verification, right? So it's as good as we can get. But I absolutely agree. This is rationales that are written by LLMs can be persuasive, and that can absolutely influence them. So yeah.
But I guess like from a team, so would it work? Like maybe you had a third set of reviewers who maybe completely anonymized. They see a rationale from an LLM, they see a rationale from the human, they look at both, they don't have labels.
100%, that could be done. Right now the paper's out for review, but I'll mention that to the authors. I think that actually would be a good step. But it's a very boring task. Like I said, people that spend hours on this. So, but actually, no, that's a great idea. And then you see the human ones as well. Yeah. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, so I think I have a question that's in a similar domain as the one discussed over here. So reproducibility. I have a similar pipeline, and I think I've been very conservative on the reproducibility side, where I have a local LLM with temperature set at 0.
Yeah.
And here you're advocating for API use, and it seemed like the temperature was set at 0.2, which I know adds a little bit of random element to it. Which there's a Christopher Berry and Arthur Sperling paper where they say the only way we can have real social science replicability is temperature 0, local LLM. Is that too conservative from your point of view? Is there real?
I don't think so. In fact, we didn't really have a definitive good reason why we went for 0.2 other than 0 just seemed extreme. But that would be the way forward. Now, if you've used any of the reasoning models, GPT-5 onwards, 01 onwards, 03, they don't have temperature parameters at all, right? It's just gone. So that's no longer an issue, but it's compensated by the fact that they can actually have a chain of thought that tends to get better quality answers. And local models have this as well. GPT-OSS is a chain of thought model. Extraordinary that it can do this on such a small model. But yeah, generally, if I can go back in time to that paper, I'd say we might as well just do 0 and see how much better consistency we got. But we got 90% anyway, so.
If rather than so naively put a very broad prompt, say, like an impossible task, just find me something interesting in this, Is it better to sort of interact, if you're just using a chatbot, is it better to interact with it and actually work with it to design what the final prompt should be?
Absolutely. I mean, look, and especially this is what I do in Codex a lot of the time. It's extraordinary for that as its brainstorming partner. And here's the thing, right? How you interact with it kind of mirrors your vibe and what your sophistication level. Anthropic did this great study recently. If you're sincere about really wanting to unpack and do a deep dive, it can absolutely match your quality on that. And it's extraordinary because so much of understanding for humans is meaning making, and it's a social action. So this is why, in teaching, it works particularly well when you're in a classroom, you're speaking with other students and the teacher, because there's that meaning making activity, that conversation dialogue really helps with. So it doesn't have to be a perfect, super intelligent AI. The very fact that it gets your noggin firing, thinking about this, absolutely, I think there's massive value in doing that. So what we did for a few of these, and it was like, okay, we're seeing these errors. Can you help me figure this out? And it genuinely helps me understand, and then I can share it with the domain experts later on. But yeah, those interactions are extremely valuable. Just not something you would put in a replication package, right? I think you could say, we benefited from brainstorming and unpacking these ideas with the AI, but it's not, part of the research method as such.
Because I've done that, mathematics papers I've just been sort of working on, and I've interacted with Claude and said, any ideas on this, and then Claude's come up with some ideas, and I thought that's interesting, but what about this? And then it's done something else, and then I've asked ChatGPT to look at what Claude has said and feed that back to Claude, and Claude says, oh yeah, it's got some points, and if you iterate and use different actions.
That's absolutely fantastic. Lots of people are doing this. A lot of software developers are doing this now because it's a great way to maximize exposure, especially if you've got accounts, paid accounts for both, and you just get more insights that way, especially if you tell them to be critical. And in fact, they will absolutely be critical of each other quite a lot.
Not sycophancy.
Gemini is seemingly the most jealous one. It's got one exchange of thoughts. It was like saying, this smells like Claude. There's no way I'm going to lose this user to Anthropic. And it's like, okay, I'm going to work on. And this is the chatting thoughts that the human didn't see. So they get, it's obviously not real, it's simulated, but it's funny to see.
I just really...
Sorry, no.
Oh, sorry, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I guess following on from that, if you generate an awful lot of code automatically, and then you do some automated testing or you cross check with another model, isn't that going to make it really quite difficult if you then want to modify? If you get a huge amount of code, brings in some libraries, isn't that?
Look, are
you just going to build a model that's a one-off, does the job, and
you might do, but you can think about that during the design phase, whether or not this is something you want to reuse as an infrastructure for later on, whether it's just purely overfit for this one exact project. But code base it's a real issue that AI generated code can bloat up and get difficult to understand. Models now are so good at it and reviewing at it, I don't think there's a problem. I know it's controversial. There's a lot of people in the software development industry who just hate this idea because they think at some point humans are going to have to pick up the pieces if the AI makes a mistake. The models keep getting better. Models keep getting better every year, and the sensible bet is they probably will. They can understand it, and code review, that's what people are doing with Codex and Claude Code and swapping back and forth and saying, find the issues with this. Can you make this simpler? Can you refactor? There's lots of ways that you can get around that. I do agree it's 100% an issue, but as long as you've got good quality empirical tests, you don't need to review every single line of code.
Right. So I guess what you're saying is that's okay if you're building something to do a task. Maybe you can modify it, maybe you can't. But if you wanted to integrate it into a wider system, then that's where the problem is going to come, because you need to modify it.
If that system has an API exposed that you've got the documentation for, the AI can absolutely build an integration with that. This is very, very standard stuff that it can do. Genuinely, I don't think there are any limits when it comes to what you can do with code. Enterprise code bases, which is literally millions of lines of code, that's a different story altogether. That's just beyond.
I guess that's where I'm trying to probe, because once you've integrated it into where you've got loads of it, and B, you don't know what else is going on.
Sure, but so what normally happens is that, let's say we want to do some kind of research on student data on the school's database system, which is SITS. What would happen is that the code would link to just the tables of data that I needed for that particular thing. The AI wouldn't need to look at the entire code base of the enterprise stuff. It will just be exposed to the data that it needs to communicate that back and forth. So I don't think that's particularly a big problem. I think for an enterprise company that's doing something like Salesforce, if they want to improve their software, probably millions of lines of code, that'd be an absolute nightmare. And I don't envy anyone working on that because it's just, it's going to be a mess. But really, for some of these projects, we're talking like a few thousand lines of code. It's doesn't have to be huge.
Thank you.
You say again about Codex. Codex is ChatGPT's version of Claude Code, and it's available on LSE Mac.
Yes, for Macs, yeah. Just go to the online store, search for Codex, and it's there.
And you need separately a ChatGPT Pro subscription or something like this? Or
you get it for the free plan, right? You need to, in order to be able to use Codex for free, you need a paid account.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Is there, so back on this, so basically we read it a few times, then we had the human review where we said, okay, we agree or we disagree on this being included or this study not being included. So then we wrote a rationale as to why, but then what would you, so we edited the prompt to reflect that. But is there a better way to give feedback to the LLM that we're calling to be able to see, okay, the human reviewers felt this way, how can I change my behavior?
So the example I gave earlier was of the Word documents. That was designed for humans. But for an AI, you might as well do something as a tabular structure, maybe JSON, maybe just a CSV file, which in a way you can ask it to just build you an app to basically annotate the data and say, all right, this is the error pattern here, this is the error pattern here. The AI will then be able to see that, and actually it's very good at saying, like, okay, I think based on this, we can probably improve the prompts. Now, what models are you using for your project?
So we compared GPT-4 Mini. We did Sonnet 6. What is it? Sonnet 6.1?
4.6.
4.6. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, ChatGPT.
First we tried Mini.
Sonnet 3.
Okay.
A combination of GPT Mini, Normal, and Sonnet
Okay.
is the different ones we've tried.
First things first, GPT-4 Mini is an absolutely abysmal model.
Okay.
An absolute joke. Do not use it for anything that needs to be correct.
Okay.
It's beautifully fast and everything. It's like really great for stuff like that. But that's the first thing I would do. GPT 5.4 Mini is an actual reasoning model.
Okay.
For this kind of task, try that out. Look it up on there. It's obviously more expensive than GPT-4 Mini, but it's a really, really good model. Really, really good.
Even when we've got like kind of nebulous definitions, because I think where it's actually hitting it, the limitations is exactly where we are hitting the limitations, which is like we've got 200,000 papers coming from different disciplines that hit the keywords, but then you have to decide, like, do they actually fit with our scope? And we're not going to think about every single case.
This is going to be a process that's probably going to be painful for a while, and you have to go through and see more and more examples until you reach something like saturation point where you've covered enough. But you do want to break down. You want to be as explicit as possible. Nebulous definitions are going to be difficult with AI. It works really well if you can really break this down exactly. The AI can absolutely help you with this. You can say, if you give it, here's my ground truth. This is what we say, and do it only for things you're very confident with, and say, how can we get this prompt more explicit so that it can get closer to this, and then test it out again. The AI is very good at that. GPT-5 onwards is actually very good at designing prompts.
I'm just curious, so the Sonnet was much more expensive. So we've just been doing a sample. We haven't done the full 210,000, obviously, in these tests. But why? What is that price difference, and is it worth it?
Anthropic are a massive rip-off. Like, they are outrageously overpriced compared to other ones. Like, if you want to use Opus, which is their best model, if you got it in the Claude web app, it's fantastic. It's just a joy to use. It's obscenely expensive. Like, I would never touch the Anthropic models. They are, several times more expensive than the OpenAI and Gemini ones. And it's the thing. Some companies, for whatever reason, OpenAI, maybe they've got more VC cash and they're able to offer it for cheaper. Same with Google. Anthropic seem to be struggling with compute. They regularly have problems where their entire system crashes. And everyone goes mental about it. And they charge so much more than the others. So I think they've got compute resource problems.
Okay.
But GPT 5.4 Mini, try that out because that is fast. It's pretty cheap, certainly much cheaper than Sonnet. And it's a really, really good model, very diligent.
Okay, super. Thank you.
All right, so nothing else? Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Lee.